Thank you,
All
Robert.
right. Let me give you a quick intro. Welcome to the Seattle Software Crafters Meetup. We are a language agnostic group that is works to make our software development careers better by talking about and practicing good quality craft practices. We're open to everyone, and we're all glad you're here. Today we have Wynne, who's going to talk about dancing with technical debt. And Matt, have we met in person?
I don't think so, Paige.
I don't think so. I know I've seen
it.
you online quite a bit, and we've had some interactions that way. We're super excited to have you here, and have at it. We'll looking forward to a good discussion. And
thanks for having me. I'm wondering how I can get that little message that says the meeting's being recorded off the screen, because it's going to get annoying. Let me just fiddle with that for a minute.
Sure.
Press OK.
Click OK.
Press play. There we go. It wouldn't let me see my cursor on the full screen. Okay. So yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about me in case you don't know me. I live here in Canada, in British Columbia, in a little mountain town called Nelson, although, as you might be able to tell from my accent, I am originally from Northern England. And long before I lived here, some combination of the Tanaha, the Sinaiaks, and the Silks people lived around these parts. And I'm very grateful to them for letting me live in this wonderful part of the planet. Yeah, I got into TDD kind of in the early 2000s, and then like really bit me in the mid 2000s, 2006, when I was looking back as like the first job that I had where I really was doing TDD habitually. And I haven't really gone back since. I am still the co-lead of the Cucumber open source project. If you don't know what Cucumber is, it's a tool for writing acceptance tests in Gherkin. So if you've ever seen that given when then format for writing examples, that's our thing. That's where that came from. I also wrote a book about that project. Right now I work for Mechanical Orchard, where we try and rescue legacy sort of 30, 40-year-old code bases. So I spend half my day reading COBOL and the other half of the day writing Elixir, which is fascinating. Yeah, I'll start with my standard disclaimer. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm very grateful to be given this platform, but I'm just here to tell you about some things that I tried and that worked in this one particular context. It really is one particular context, actually, this story is about. I have some broader thoughts based on my experience, and I am an expert in that context and that experience, but I'm not an expert in your context. So I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just trying to share my ideas. So for just as a way of like visualizing and thinking about technical debt, imagine for a minute that rather than being involved in a software team, you work at a restaurant, and the software developers are the chefs. The features, the capabilities that you're adding to the software are the meals that come out of the kitchen for the clients and that sit in the restaurant. Just visualize for a minute. Think about the environment that the chefs work in, right? The code base that they work in. What does that, if you imagine your code base that you work on today as a kitchen, what does it look like? Can you picture that kitchen? Does it look like this? Or does it look more like this? I think all of us have worked in like code bases that were at different ends of this spectrum, right? And we know how it impacts us when we try and get work done in an environment like this. And the thing I really want to call out about the difference between what we do and what chefs do is that if you are responsible for that restaurant, if it's your restaurant, right, you're the person that's paying the bills, paying the salaries, and you know, customers are starting to complain about the quality of the food or how long the meals are taking to come out, you can walk into the kitchen, and if it's a mess, you can see that mess. But most of the people who are in that position on a software team can't do the same thing. If they did ever read code. It was some time ago. They're not working in it every day. It's metaphorically very difficult for them to walk into the kitchen and just get a vibe check of like, how is it in there? So as software people who are working in the code base every day, we have a lot of responsibility because we can make a lot of choices about how we spend our time, whether we choose to sharpen the knives and clean down the sides, or whether we choose to neglect things and leave things till later. And those choices have a huge impact on the way the business is able to operate, right? So it's a lot of responsibility on us, and we need to be aware of that and conscious of that. Just in terms of like definitions for technical debt, I want to call out this distinction that a friend of mine, Paul Dyson from the UK, a long time old XP stalwart, made a few years ago in a conversation we had back when Twitter wasn't awful, about the distinction between technical debt and technical dirt. And I think this is a really interesting distinction. So in Paul's view, and he's somebody who's kind of moved to the level of managing businesses of made of XP development. So he sells out software that is made by teams that are practicing XP. And he thinks about technical debt as being this quite kind of high level lever that the team can use to make choices, like tactical choices, which is basically kind of using Yagni of like, you know, we don't need this thing to scale yet because we've only got one customer. So we're not going to worry about building this thing to scale. We're going to build a smaller, lighter weight implementation that we know won't work if we get, you know, another 50 customers, but it'll do for now from a business point of view, right? And that's kind of the level he thinks about technical debt versus technical dirt, which is the kind of mess that you leave when you're, you know, just generally doing work in the code base, where like the model that's expressed by the code sort of drifts out of date. The original Ward Cunningham definition, where the model that's expressed in the code drifts out of date with your new understanding of the domain. So, you know, renaming things, extracting methods, all that kind of stuff, the stuff that you just need to do as part of an everyday TDD loop. So whether that distinction is useful to you or not, I think it's an interesting one, right? Thinking, because there are like different levels of this. I also want to bring in this definition from Feathers, who knows an awful lot about this stuff. He thinks about technical debt not in terms of looking backwards, so looking at how the code is now, but more looking forward at what do we need to be able to do to the code. And I think this is really interesting because it really doesn't matter if there is debt, if there is poorly crafted code, if you're never going to change it, right? It's not going to get in your way. The stuff that gets in your way is where the code is like changing all the time. So here's this perspective that it's about the effort needed to add a feature. All right. So I'm going to give you a little scenario, right? So you're working in an ensemble. I don't mind whether it's 2 people or 5 people. I prefer bigger ones, but that's you. And you're walking by something that you can see will cause somebody friction. It's not really getting in your way, but you can see how it might well get in someone's way. What are you going to do? I think you've got 3 choices. You could just walk on by, just leave it. You could fix it right now, or you could make a note and consider fixing it later. Which would you do? Maybe put it in the chat. I don't know if I can see, well, there's all sorts of noise in the chat. What would you do? D, make it worse. Yes. C. So most people would note it down. It depends. It depends. Yes. So Oh, I lost my mouse pointer. So yeah, you're at this fork in the road, right? You could ignore it, you could fix it right now, or you could note it down, or you could make it worse. I didn't think about that one. But yeah, like there are, for each of these forks in the road, there's a context where each of them is a valid choice, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, why would you go down each fork in the road? And I just want to shout out to my old mate Chris Young from London, who certified me years ago as a it depends practitioner. If you want a certification, they're very easy to come by. You just have to meet him in person and ask for one, basically. So yeah, it depends. Great answer. So if you're going to ignore it, like why would you want to ignore it? What's a valid context for just walking on by? So maybe one of them is like you're in a rush, you got something more important to do, balance of problems. This one zooms right out of scale. It isn't important right now. You're doing something much more important and you need to focus on it. The other reason might be that nobody's ever going to change this code again. You've already got a brand new version of it that's being switched over to tomorrow. There's just one little last change you need to make to the system today. Sort of a more softer version of that is that you think this code's unlikely to be changed in the future. It rarely changes, or the reason that you're changing it is occasional. Or maybe you just don't have a clear idea of how to improve it. You can feel there's some friction in there, but you don't really know, you don't have a clear idea, you don't have a clear plan. And maybe the right thing to do in that situation is just to observe it, but walk past, not actually do anything. About fixing it right now. Here's a valid reason why you might fix it right now, would be the old Kent Beck adage to make the change easy first, warning this may be hard, and then make the easy change, right? This is kind of what Feathers is also talking about, like pre-factoring code in order to make the change that you're about to make easy. So this might well be a good reason where, like, if you've written a failing test and then you start to do the implementation, you start bumping up against the design of the code, maybe you want to tag that test out or git reset hard to get back to green, then go and make that change and then get back into the red part of your TDD loop. So that would be like a really valid reason for fixing it right now. It's going to make the thing that you're about to do easier. And maybe if it's only going to take like 2 minutes to do, like really only take 2 minutes, it's just one little thing, maybe it would be okay to do it right now. But I mean, how many times have you gone down the rabbit hole, right? And found yourself 2 hours later, we still haven't done a git commit. What were we doing here anyway? Can anyone even remember? Right. Another one of my favorite, like I really love talking about, like the team I'm on at the moment, we talk quite a lot about side quests. And like side quests are great, right? And they can be really, really valuable because you discover them in context. You feel the need, you feel the pull. But they also can be an incredible distraction. So trying to kind of find that line can be really, really challenging sometimes. So I want to talk about Buddhism for a minute. I went on a journey a few years ago now where I got really into meditation, like not just sort of doing these apps that nag you to do it for 15 minutes a day, but like I went on a 10-day silent retreat where there was no eye contact, there was no touching. We practiced meditation from 4 a.m. Yeah, for hours a day, and it was amazing, like really amazing, life-changing, I would say. And this practice of Vipassana meditation, which was kind of popularized, I guess I'd say, by this monk Mahasi. So there's a school, there are many schools of Vipassana. Mahasi Vipassana is the school where while you are meditating, which is just focusing, if you've not tried it, it's just like focusing on your breathing, focusing on the sensations that are happening in your body that you're experiencing. But also in Mahasi, it'll be focusing on thoughts that are occurring to you or sounds that you can hear. or smells that you can smell. So it's kind of like becoming aware of the senses and how they can interrupt your thinking. And there's a practice in Mahasi Vipassana that they call noting. So noting is where when you experience a distracting thought, you take a moment to acknowledge it and give it its kind of due attention, but deliberately and intentionally and consciously. And then you put it down and you get back to the focus on the breath. And it's a really valuable practice for sort of making you conscious and intentional about being aware of what's going on, but also the bigger picture, which is of staying with the breath. So I think about noting in the context of the third choice there that I outlined of like writing it down, saving it for later, the choice C that a lot of people put in the chat, as a similar thing to that practice from Vipassana, where we're trying to stay in the flow, and the side quest is calling us away to go and do this tempting thing, but oftentimes we don't need to do it right now, but we are drawn to do it. And allowing ourselves to note it down somewhere keeps us in the flow, because we feel safe that we're not going to forget about that thing that we noticed that is going to bug somebody. Maybe it's going to bug us in a minute or tomorrow. So we're not going to forget about it. So that makes us feel safer to just carry on with what it was that we were doing. But where should we do the noting down? Where should we note it? Like some popular methods that I use and I have used in the past. I mean, you can't see my desk, right? But like I've got a pile of index cards on my desk. I've always got a stack of them next to my keyboard. And when I'm pairing or mobbing, I've always got an index card with me where I'm taking notes. It might be refactorings I want to do. It might be things I'm noticing about, like keyboard shortcuts I'm learning from somebody else, or things that are wrong with my development environment that are slowing me down. Lots of things. I'm just noting things because I want to stay in the flow and I want to not get distracted by those thoughts, but I also don't want to forget about them. So index cards can be a good place to note things down. The other place you could note down when we're talking about technical debt, particularly friction points in the code, things that are getting in our way are going to get in our way, would be to write a to-do. You can write a line of to-do in the code where the problem is. And then the other thing you could do is you could put it in your issue tracker. So maybe you're working on a story, you're going to add a task to that story that says, we noticed this bit of debt, or we left this bit of mess, we're going to clean it up before we finish this story. That's kind of the three places I can think of where you might popularly note things down. Obviously, the index card, some people don't use a physical index card. Maybe they've got like a logseq page or a scratch file in their editor where they write these things down. But everybody kind of tends to keep a place. People who think about the code tend to keep a place somewhere. So, yeah, and what one of those could be your issue tracker, or you could file a TPS report. It's always good to remember Bill. So yeah, I think about these three different ways of noting things down. There's like different attributes that they give you, right, that I think are all valuable. So is it visible to the whole team? If I write it on an index card, nobody else can see it. And that's a shame. Because what if like me and 2-3 other teammates have all written the same thing down on our index cards? There's like weight there on that particular problem, but we can't see that. So sharing the noting, I think, is valuable. But I think you also want low bureaucracy. An index card is super low bureaucracy, right? I just pick up the card, pick up my pen, write it down. Obviously, at the other end of the spectrum is adding a ticket into your tracker system, or your or adding a task to it or whatever. That really is going to break you out of the flow, right? To have to go off and do that. I also think about context. So how much context are you able to leave with the note? If somebody else was to read this note, would it make sense to them? Would they understand what you intended, what you meant when you wrote it? And also, is it time limited? So is there a way for this thing to expire? Because the last thing you want to do is just like build up a huge pile of these things and never deal with them, right? So I think to talk about visibility, like Jira or whatever tracker you're using is great because the whole team can see it. Index card, not so much. And to-dos, yeah, everybody, at least who works on the code base, can see them. But as I said, the issue tracker is not very good for low bureaucracy, but the other two solutions are pretty good. What about context? Well, if you take the time to write enough of a narrative, perhaps with like a link to the GitHub line of code, the source code into your issue tracker, you can definitely leave a lot of context in an issue tracker if you want to. But obviously you're paying the bureaucracy price, right? An index card's pretty poor, like a little scribble on an index card is probably going to work as a mnemonic for you for the rest of the day. But oftentimes I pick up these index cards that are 2-3 days old and I'm like, I can't even read what I wrote, let alone can I remember which line of code I was talking about or whatever. So index cards can be a bit poor. To-dos, I think, are awesome because they're right there on the line of code that's causing a problem. We even sometimes used to like use a shared name between two to-dos where there's a bit of duplication so you could like link them together. And you know, you can even have like more narrative in a git commit message where you add the to-do that explains like what you're thinking at the time, where you had discomfort. So I think there can be a lot of context with a to-do. But the time limited factor, I think, is really important. And a lot of people, you know, what's great about an index card is when you're bored of it, right? I mean, I've built up a pile of them on my desk, but they're not dear to me, right? It's easy to drop an index card. It's easy to get rid of it. We all know what happens when things go into Jira, right? They live forever. I mean, you can set like robots that will sweep, you know, tickets that haven't been touched for so many days and stuff, but I don't see people doing that very often. And this is also the thing that people complain about using to-dos is that, well, we just build up a pile of like mess in the code of all these signposts that are just saying like things that we wish we'd done, but we never get around to dealing with them. And it's just depressing. But does that have to be the case? So this is this experience I want to tell you about, right? So context here is that like we ran our own business for Cucumber for most of the 2010s. It kind of started around 2011, 2012, and we sold it in 2019. And we built up, by 2019, we were like 12 people, and we were able to put a mob of between 2 and 5 people most days working on a SaaS product that we were building that was sort of like the sustainable future for the business, like a sort of collaboration tool for teams that did BDD, used Cucumber, so like a sort of value add thing, right? So we were going out and doing consulting and whatnot, working on the open source project, but we're also building this SaaS tool. So we were like, you know, the devs and the business at the same time. There was like no gap between the devs and the business. We were the business. We were mobbing all the time. We were doing TDD, BDD all the time. And we'd settled on using trunk-based development. We didn't use pull requests. Pretty much everything went to main. Maybe if you were like ship, show, ask, if you were an ask, if you were off solo sitting on a plane or something, you might put something in a pull request to sort of suggest things or start a discussion, but generally everything just happened in the mob. So in that context, we started to we developed this habit of noting and using to-dos, right? So, you know, we'd add a to-do, we'd add another to-do, we'd add another to-do, and then gradually they all sort of like build up, and we're like, right, what are we going to do about this? Because we like noting them down, but this is a pain in the ass that there's just like noise here. We're not getting around to dealing with them. What are we going to do? Well, my co-founder, Aslak Helisoy, had this genius idea. Like, what if the to-do could have a half-life? Like, what if you could, because basically like they're much more valuable to you when they're fresh. Like you still have the context because you only wrote it recently. You so you could make the change easy, but also like the longer it's there, this it's telling you something, right? And you want it to kind of age like the same way as an index card would age. Or if you put a post-it note on the wall, gradually, if you leave it long enough, the post-it note will like dry up and fall on the floor by itself. And you kind of want that like natural aging. Or if you've ever used pirate mode in Trello, anybody done that? And like the tickets just fade away as they get older. So what if we could do something like that with a to-do? And of course, the information is there because it's in Git, right? So you can look at the date when that to-do was committed and find out how old it is. So he built this tool, and it started out just like as a bash script. It's got a little bit more, I don't know, got a bit better, a bit more usable than just a bash script now. And he named it after the bumbailiff. So the bumbailiff is like this kind of colloquial name in Britain for somebody that used to come around and collect debts. And yeah, this is where you'll find it. We kind of published it most when we were at Smart Bear. I don't work for Smart Bear anymore. And I forked it because I made some changes to it recently. So that's where to find it. And here's like a quick demo, right? So you give the bumbailiff a number, and the number is the total number of to-do days that you will tolerate. Okay, so it's now going to go around and it's going to go and find all of the to-dos in the code base, and it's going to age them, and then it's going to work out the cumulative age of all of the to-dos in your code base. So this one here at the top is almost a year old, 230 days old. And the other two were written in the last kind of month or so. So cumulatively today we have 308 to-do days, and I've said that we're allowed 400. So we're still kind of like just about within the limit, but we're getting close to it. But if I fix one of those to-dos, now the bumbailiff's quite happy, right? We've only accumulated 72 days and we're allowed 400. So actually I can kind of like turn the screw a little bit, and I can set my limit back down to something more like 100. That would be okay. And as we start cleaning these up more, we could shrink that down again. And really, like, this was the dance that I'm talking about in the title of this talk, is that what we experienced was that this limit, it was kind of like an overdraft, right, of debt that we were allowing ourselves to have. And this is running in CI, and in our like local test run. So every time you ran the test, you'd see this list of to-dos that you'd left lying around and where you were doing against your limit. And some days what we would do when we were getting close to the limit is we'd increase it, because we're in the middle of trying to deliver an important feature and we didn't want to get distracted by the side quests. And then once we delivered that feature and we felt like we were kind of like back at a resting stage, we could then say, okay, right, now it's time to pay down some of this debt. Let's have a look at these to-dos. And you triage them, right? Because maybe you wrote this thing 3 weeks ago and actually it's just like, it doesn't matter that much. Let's get rid of it. So you just delete the to-do. But other times you're like, yeah, great. Yeah, we need to fix that. Let's fix it now. And so you'd pay down that debt, you'd bring down the limit in your CI, and you're sort of back to like a level that you like. And this was the dance. So we were always kind of playing with this level. How much scope should we give ourselves? Let's increase the scope, or let's deal with the to-dos and bring it down again. Okay, so that's my experience. My thoughts about this, I think I think it was maybe a conversation in this meetup where somebody used the phrase perfection is an illusion, and I really like it. Like, I think about it a lot because I think of myself as a recovering perfectionist. Like, I have a tendency towards perfectionism, and I know that, and I'm trying to let go of it. And I think it's really true that like we can fool ourselves into believing that we could make our code perfect, or that it needs to be perfect, that it could ever be perfect. It's just bollocks. Like, it is never going to be perfect. It just needs to be good enough for now. And sort of letting go of that idea, I think, is really helpful. And so getting used to the idea that there is always going to be some mess in the code. There's going to be some discomfort. There's going to be some friction. But do we want to be aware of that, or do we want to like hide from it and pretend it's not there? So, you know, I think about the Japanese idea of wabi-sabi, this idea that like things don't have to be, there's a beauty in imperfection. Um, yeah, I think about that when I think about how we look at software. Because I think, I said this earlier, I think technical debt is inescapable. Like it's always happening. If you just leave the software and don't do anything to it, it still kind of rots by itself. Because it, you know, and maybe just your dependencies go out of date and you need to update them. But there's also your knowledge of the domain is growing while the software is staying stagnant. And if you're not keeping up with that, the debt's just growing all by itself. And it might even, in some contexts, and this is what Paul Dyson argues, it might even give you a business advantage. Like sometimes to just say, we know that that is going to be a problem for us at some point, but not right now. Let's leave it. That might even give you a business advantage to be able to just take a shortcut for now, ignore the side quest, and go for shoot for the main goal. But by noting, what we do is we acknowledge the problems that are there in the code base and we keep them visible. And also by getting in the habit of noting, we develop our senses about, you know, what is good, what is bad, what do we not like about this code base, and we start to kind of get a shared model of the problems in the code rather than people keeping their own private lists on index cards. It also leaves signposts. So Sandy Metz has this lovely idea about code being exemplary, and I think that's great, but oftentimes it isn't, and you can recognize it's not exemplary, and putting a signpost in to say, you know, warning, like the internet used to be all the time in the 90s, right? These under construction signs, kind of having these little signposts in there to tell people that they might not want to regard this code as entirely exemplary. And it also gives us time to get perspective. So something that seems like a problem right now, when you've got a bit of distance from it, maybe a week's time, might not seem so important with, you know, the perspective, all of the context of all of the other things that you've got to do. Yeah, and as I said earlier, it creates context, it creates consensus. We're going to start to see what everybody else thinks about the problems in the code. Okay, that's all my things I wanted to say about this. There's some links here to the bumbailiff script. I'd love it if you'd give it a try on your team. Let me know how you're getting on. I'll be honest, the team I'm on right now at Mechanical Orchard are so disciplined about putting things into Pivotal Tracker. I've been unable to get them to put to-dos into the main branch. We put them into branches before they get merged in, but so far it's not happening for the team I'm on. But yeah, I'd love it if you give it a try and let me know how you get on, because it's definitely worked for us well at Cucumber. Yeah, and there's some other sort of references of things that I talked about in the talk. I'll share these slides in Slack. And I do need to go in about 15 minutes because I'm running a workshop at 11 at work. So I guess, Paige, I'll turn it over to you, hey?
Yeah, that's fabulous, and I love the idea of noting. I have an aversion to leaving a to-do in my code, and so I think that would have to be something I would practice. But I'm willing to try a little bit and try your script to see what happens. And what happens if you go over the number? Like that, there was you had 400, but you only had 200 some, and then you cut one out and you moved it to
Oh,
one.
did I not show you that?
Yeah.
Have I got it locally? I could maybe try it now. Yeah. Yeah, it'll fail. So
Okay.
it returns a non-zero exit code, so you can fail your build. So if
I
I put,
see.
what's the number here right now? So it's 100 out of 74. So if my debt levels are more, I mean, honestly, like it should normally be more like 10 or 15 or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If it was even 20, we'd get a non-zero exit code. And you know, it's highlighting it all in red. Dun
Yeah.
dun dun. So you
Interesting.
get, yeah.
Is there a way that it could just pick the oldest one and delete that? No, I'm just
I've thought about that. I've even thought about like, yeah, you know, could it take it out and put the older ones into Pivotal Tracker or Jira or whatever you're using? Like, So you kind of keep a level of them in the code that are still in the process of like devs deciding, and then it has to get raised up to a higher level of visibility maybe. But yeah, not at the moment. No. Pull
Do you
request
find
accepted, no page.
do you find that this encourages you to deal with the older ones first?
Yeah, that's the game, right? Yeah,
Is that the
because
game? Like that's my
well,
question. Like,
that's like a way I say is that's not the game, but yes, it you definitely get more points for dealing with an older one, right?
yeah. But is
Um,
it? It seems like if you haven't dealt with it for a long time, maybe the newer ones are better to deal with.
well, the newer ones are probably easier to deal with, but the older ones, it's kind of like flipping your inbox, like rather than
Yeah.
having the latest emails that you've just received, flipping it and dealing with the ones that you've been leaving and humping for months. If you're ever in that headspace to go, okay, right, I'm going to reply to that person who wrote to me 3 months ago, and I've really been meaning to get back to them, but it's a bit difficult. It's like that kind of mentality. So, it is confronting a decision about, do we still care about this thing that we wrote 36 days ago or not? At some point, you got to reckon with that.
So
Which
obviously
may or may
this is
not
not.
core it may or may not correlate with time, Llewellyn, based on how much you've been curating your queue.
Yeah. Obviously, it's not about email, but you can flip your email box. You can go in reverse order. That's a
Yeah,
thing.
you can just sort it by date received.
Hmm.
And just hold the delete key.
You're right. Yeah. That might be a thing to do.
I like, again, like recovering perfectionist. I aspire to inbox zero. I live with inbox roundabout somewhere between 100 and 500, but I do always try and kind of like keep it.
Nice.
I'm at inbox 30,000.
Yeah, I haven't given into that yet.
The other question I had was, you mentioned that if you're not going to touch it, it doesn't really matter. I was curious, sometimes I find that if things are too hard, I don't touch it because it's too hard. Right? Like there are things that once we've cleaned up, all of a sudden it's like we're in there all the time because there's all these things we wanted. But we never did it when it was too hard because it was just too damn hard. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't quite understand the question though, because there's a difference between it's too hard and we're never going to change this code, so it doesn't matter. It's not going to get in our way. Those are
Sometimes
two
I think
different things.
some of the code doesn't get changed because everybody knows how difficult it would be to do anything in that space. So you're like, oh, the mainframe you don't touch. And not
Oh,
as
okay, right.
opposed
So you
to,
actually find like another way of implementing the behavior that you want by kind of walking around the
yeah.
problem area. Okay.
Or you just deal with, you don't get the thing you want because you're just like, I'd love unicorns, but
Well, right, but I mean, when I'm talking about changing, I'm talking about, you're trying to deliver some behavior that your users want. And then, yeah, if you recognize that um, you're avoiding making the change in the mainframe where you really should make it, but nobody knows how to write COBOL anymore, then that is a problem that you need to notice at some point, I suppose. But
I
yeah,
usually
I
don't
don't know if I
notice it
see
till
that happen.
after. Like usually it's after we clean something up, all of a sudden we get a lot of demand for it. And I don't
Right.
realize that it's being repressed ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I've got like a memory I can tap into to
For that.
really relate to that. Has anyone else?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking like well, and if you say that this part hasn't been cleaned up and you haven't changed it because it's not cleaned up, does that also mean that you are also not looking at that part of the code? Because my experience is, if there is a part of the code that I would really want to change, but I don't change it because it's so hard to change it, at least I frequently bump into it,
Mm.
and at
So
least frequently see the to do.
like an easy example of this is if I go back to like 2010, all my CI devices just tested one implementation, like one version of the language, one version of the thing. I don't have any CI devices that do that now. Like they all test multiple OSs and multiple things. Was it just not a problem in 2010? Did I just like, was everything just perfect then and now I'm concerned about it? No, it was too hard to set up the extra machines. Right. So like once I get that capability, a lot of times I lean into it a lot. And I see that in companies a lot as well, where it's like, oh, we can change something in the database. Now we start doing it. But until it was safe.
This is one of the things I think is valuable about some kind of shared visibility noting practice for the team, is that often those things are like they're in that like bad quadrant of they only cause like low level friction. So they're never like absolutely preventing you from making the change. They're just making it annoying. But if they make it, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. If they make it annoying for 50 people over the course of 3 months, that's still a lot of like accumulated friction, right?
So are you saying that like by doing the practice of noting, you can actually build political capital to fix a thing that you couldn't do individually?
Or just data, whether you call it political capital or not, it's just like data. You can notice that shit, like I'm still finding this annoying and somebody found it annoying 3 months ago and we still haven't dealt with it. Like that's data. And it's harder to see that if somebody's put it away in a Jira ticket of like chores to do someday when we have the fun day where we clear up all the code or whatever. Like it's much easier to see if it's right there in the code where you're having to walk past it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Excellent.
Do you find that? Sorry, one more. Do you find that noting makes you lazier about actually fixing things up?
I don't think so. No, because you still have to. The bumbailiff will remind you that you've got to take decisions. And maybe the decision is, we're just going to take on more debt for now. But at some point, you're going to reckon with that.
Nice. Thank you.
Awesome. Daniel?
Yeah, so I'm wondering this, whenever I left to-dos in the past, then I never really fixed them. So I'm wondering, actually, when you do hit the threshold, what's the ratio of actually fixing versus saying, it's no longer important, it's easier just to remove the comment, right? Because I'm no longer in that context when I'm coming back to to-do. When I create a to-do, I know my head is in that code. It's simpler for me to just do the renames or do the quick refactoring. I prefer to do those right there because I found that I've never done it after, right? It's just hard.
Me too. I think again, like that distinction between dirt and debt, I think all of the dirt, you just do it right there and then, definitely. It's this stuff that's more like low level friction. I don't really know how I'm going to change this right now. I don't really know whether it's worth it yet. This kind of like, but I notice it that it's not quite right and it doesn't seem good. It's that kind of stuff where you can like build up a bit more of a picture, give yourself a bit more distance to make a decision about whether or not it's worth the trade-off to invest in resolving that issue that you've sensed in the code.
Okay, so you feel like
different.
Swipe the kitchen floor versus decide if you want to put the island in or not.
Yeah, right. Or like change where you hang the pans. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. So maybe, more like, I don't know if redesign is too big of a word versus refactoring, but it's that kind of, it's a bit, bigger, lower. Like it's either harder to do or the friction that it causes seems to be tolerable for a while. Like you're going to tolerate it for a bit, but like when's the point where you're just like, okay, fuck this. We've done it 10 times now. I've had it. Let's fix this.
Cool. Thanks for that distinction. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to just take one more question if anyone's got one. I mean, I don't need to be here. Anyway, you all can have a great conversation without me, and I'll be sad to walk away, but I will have to go in 3 minutes. Anyone got another?
Well, let me wrap up and say thank you very much, Matt. This was enlightening, and as someone said, Steven said in the chat, like one of the biggest takeaways that I got out of this talk also was that discussion of technical debt versus technical dirt, and I like those concepts, and I will start to talk about those concepts and make them more a part of our language. I like that a lot. I very much appreciate the talk, and thank you for being here. Next month, our own Cody is going to be, Cody Fintak is going to be talking about chunk-based ping pong. And so that's May 23rd. Please join us. I also put the link to the Slack channel in the chat, and you're more than welcome to join us if you're not part of that and continue our conversation there. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording, and we can continue talking for a bit.